Hi guys. Longtime fan. I'm a former Southern Independent Baptist preacher turned atheist.
You got the accent for it.
Yeah. Now I'm a libertarian, and I do find myself to be kind of an outcast in my own community, especially in
and deservedly so. No, I'm teasing.
Yeah, believe me. There is a politically correct way that a lot of atheists are tiptoeing around Islam these days. Most of the broadcasters are.
Is it Bilal in Irvine?
Bilal.
Bilal, how you doing?
You can call me Bill.
Bill.
Yeah.
You're completely Americanized.
Really? Okay. How are you, Matt?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I just have been following your show for quite some time, only recently, and I came across. I tried to call you last week on Sunday, but I believe I was a bit late. And today, I thought I'm on time, so I just called to ask a few questions, which I have had in mind for quite some time now.
Go ahead.
Well, as you may be informed by now, is that I come from a Muslim background, and there's one question that I really have had in my mind ever since I was a child, and I've been asking this question to lots of people, the preachers, my parents, my associates, and everybody else around me. And the question is, why is it that the sole reason I'm born in a Muslim family?
Can you repeat that?
The one reason that I'm born in a Muslim family, and I've been raised as a Muslim. I've been brought up as one. I've been taught those teachings and not taught the teachings of Christianity or other religions that surround me. Why does that make me correct, and why is it that the Christian who has been brought up in his Christian house, he's been told that he's correct and everybody else is going to hell, and in my case, I'm going to hell? I mean, isn't the same thing, isn't the same way that I feel about Islam is how the Christian feels about Christianity? I mean, who's right then? Who is right?
Well, you can't all be right, but you could all be wrong.
Correct.
That's why, we rationalist, skeptical types go back down to, the core question. Can any of you prove that any of the supernatural entities that you believe in actually exist?
Well, that's a good question.
And as soon as you can't, then we say, okay, so we set that aside. Those people, that group can't prove that their God exists. This other group can't prove their God exists, and we're atheists because we haven't found the group that can prove that its God exists yet.
That's correct. I mean, I've been thinking about that question, is there anything that is going to put on my faith and say this is correct because, I've got the evidence or anything for that matter that points remotely to the idea that I'm correct. And I was looking for that. And I went through all the people who've been healed, or so they say. And I just saw that these things were common between Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and everybody else.
Yeah.
There's nothing special in any particular religion. Now, the funny part, though, is that if I choose to leave Islam, if I choose to be an apostate, I face death threats.
Yeah. We wouldn't call that funny. I'm glad that you're able to call that funny, a funny thing.
I mean, the thing is that why do they have to take matters into their own hands? Why can't God himself be good enough to deal with me? Why do they have to...
Their God is so weak and feeble that he has to send them out to kill you.
Exactly. I mean, what the hell do I do then? I mean, I have to also say that, this may sound really stupid, but I have been, ever since a child, I was told about hell and heaven. And whenever the thought of leaving the religion comes to my mind, I immediately face this fear, this frightening fear of hell, which has been programmed into me as a child, and I just can't get rid of it.
And a lot of people can't, and it's one of the things you can ask yourself is, if there was a God, would he have to resort to that kind of fear tactic in order to, convince you? I'd recommend Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book, Infidel. Outstanding, especially if you're talking about, her transition from Islam to atheist. But yeah, this threat of hell, I mean...
Within 5 minutes, after having freed myself of those fears, I realized I'm an atheist. I can't believe this stuff anymore.
And today you sit there and you have absolutely no fear.
No.
Anything whatsoever supernatural.
No. I still have fear of the followers, but not of any supernatural things now.
That is quite impressive, really.
Yeah, and people will talk about the praying, etc. And there were people who were praying for God to, take me out. And if I thought for a second that their God could give me so much as a hangnail, I might be a little worried, but I don't. I'm no more afraid of the God of Christianity or the God of Islam as I am of, the boogeyman or anything else.
It's a very funny thing you say that you're actually fearful of the followers, because I just realized that's exactly my case now.
Yeah.
I'm more afraid of the death threats than the fact that I'm going to have a sword.
And in your case, it's not an irrational fear. I mean, there's a reason why Ian Hersey Lee runs around with bodyguards all over the place and has to cancel some speaking events, because she gets death threats and they're real. Now, whether or not your family or would actually follow through on it, I don't know, because I don't know your family.
My family wouldn't be such a problem, but the people, the Muslim community here, they wouldn't be very pleased.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a big scare. I mean, you see, this is one thing I actually really want to emphasize on, but I really can't do it, because if you talk about this in public, they say, you're an infidel, they label you one, and then you get all the hatred. They don't listen to you, do they? And all they say is, you were never a true Muslim.
By the way, I forgot to do this the other day, and this is not meant in any way to necessarily insult you, but I missed out on Everybody Draw Muhammad Day.
No, you didn't. It's the 20th.
It's the 20th?
Yeah, it's still coming
Why were
up.
the schools doing it early?
I don't know. There's probably
well,
multiple.
I'm doing it anyway, so I drew my
Hey,
stick finger.
every day is Everybody Draw Muhammad Day.
So there I am. For all those people who said I was afraid to be an infidel against religions other than Christianity, I'm an infidel with respect to all of them. And, a stick figure. And there were people who were upset about it, and they run around changing it.
As somebody who plays tabletop fantasy role-playing games, I'm not only going to draw Muhammad, I'm going to write up his stats.
Cool.
So you can beat him up in a game.
That has to go on the blog.
Or team up with him. You could make him a good guy, I guess.
That has to go up on the blog. Anyway, Bill, thanks a lot for calling. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Nice talking to you.
Yes, hello, Matt.
Hi, Mohammed.
How are you doing?
Doing very well. How about yourself?
Yes, I'm doing fine. I want to speak about my belief in God, the evidences we Muslims have for God. I told the show before, but I didn't feel my points were very clear in my previous calls.
Sure. Okay. So just for clarity, it might be good if you gave like a brief definition of the God that you believe exists. You don't have to go on forever. And then tell us exactly, start with what you think the best evidence is, because we might have to decide, what should or shouldn't count as evidence. But go ahead.
Okay. As for God, He is a being. He is a being above the world. He is a being with perfect qualities. And this is, basically the God of Abraham, who created the world and who maintains it by His will and power. That is who God is, the Creator. There are many verses in the Quran which speak about God. There is a very short chapter in the Quran. It is a very valuable chapter because it weighs a third of the Quran actually, and it basically was revealed. We believe when the Meccans, when the tribe of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to, they were at the time unbelievers in his call. So they came to Muhammad and they said to him, "Describe to us your Lord. What is he made of?" So the Prophet ﷺ recited to them these verses. Say he is God, the One, God the Self-Sufficient. He neither begets nor is born, nor is there to him any equivalent. So that is, maybe the shortest, you can say, definition of what who God is.
Well, I was actually, the definition you started with as a being, essentially you said a perfect being who sustains the world.
Yes.
That's far more specific than just saying God is the one and is self-sufficient. That's a bunch of sophistry that doesn't actually describe characteristics of God. Saying that God is a perfect being that sustains the world, that's a good enough starting place. So I guess what we need is...
I don't believe it's sophistry, Matt, because when we say as-Samad, it means the one on whom everything depends when he doesn't depend on anything. That is a consequence of him being the creator.
Saying that God is the thing upon which everything else is contingent doesn't even get to whether or not it's a being. That's why I'm saying that there's nothing substantive added there. When you've already said that God is a perfect being that sustains the world, you don't have to say he's the one and is self-sufficient and all that, because those are not as specific.
I was reading the verse, actually.
Sure, but I'm just saying that doesn't help us. But if we go with God being this perfect being that sustains the world, then the next thing we need to talk about is what evidence has convinced you that such a being exists. And I'll warn you in advance, there's a bunch of problems. How could you possibly tell whether a being is perfect or not?
Well, basically, the reason we know that God exists is through the evidences and through the signs which he creates in the world. It's as simple as that. There are things which come into existence and things which go out of existence. I'm not convinced that anything comes into existence or goes out of existence. So far as I can tell, things simply change state. But even if we assume that something comes into existence, how is that evidence that God is the reason it comes into existence? Can I speak a little bit about, because I believe that many people, if they knew that things come into existence, they will accept that there is someone who is bringing them into existence.
Well, okay.
There is something bringing them into existence.
Here's the problem, Mohammed. I'll let you address that. But first of all, saying that if people believed things came into existence, you think they would be convinced that there's a God that's doing it, that's completely irrelevant. What people become convinced of is independent from what people should become convinced of. So if you want to, you can give me an example of something that comes into existence. But at the end of the day, whether something comes into existence or something just changes state and you want to label that as coming into existence, that is separate from how do we know what caused that?
How do we know what caused that?
Yeah, you're saying that. Okay. Like, give me an example of something you think comes into existence.
Okay. I believe that trees, human beings.
Okay, we'll just go with human beings. Let's just go with me.
Yes.
You think that I came into existence. I think that I am merely a conglomeration and rearrangement of atoms that existed prior to that.
Yes.
But I will agree that this package, this meat sack thinking entity, there was a period in time where Matt didn't exist, and there's a period of time now it does. I think we're just dealing with labels here. But we'll go with me.
There's no label, Matt. Just a second. Because you are only the sum of your components. You're the sum of those atoms and components, and if there is a soul, you're the sum of that. You're the sum of whatever is you. Whatever is.
Yes, that's essentially what I'm saying.
Components.
That this big meat sack, this thinking meat sack, is something we call Matt. And your view is that Matt came into existence, and I'm going to set aside that point, because whether we're just talking about Matt as the label for this current state of this arrangement of matter, what I'm saying here is that it doesn't matter to this discussion. You're saying that because
very much.
Mohammed, hang on.
Very much, Matt.
You are saying that I came into existence and somehow this is evidence for God, correct?
I'm saying that because you came into existence, God, therefore God. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's what I asked. So the answer is yes. Please explain how my coming into existence, whether it happened or not, is irrelevant. We can, dicker about whether or not I'm just a rearrangement. Please explain how my coming into existence is evidence for God.
Okay. Basically, there are two ways to know God's existence through his signs. The first
through signs?
through the signs, observing the signs.
Okay.
Okay. The first is intuitive. So, we believe, as Muslims, we believe, and we observe this in many people, and they know God intuitively, without need of rational arguments.
Yeah, I reject that wholheartedly as
that's not evidence.
Yes, I know that.
Okay.
I know that. But if that doesn't work, if that intuition somehow got changed, you have to rely on some rational arguments.
Yes, that's all I care about is rational arguments, but particularly not just rational arguments, but rational arguments supported by evidence. The note here said you had evidence for God, and I've outlined this and specifically asked for the evidence. And instead of giving the evidence, you're telling me that you could know it by intuition or perhaps a rational argument. I want the evidence that shows that my coming into existence is explained, best explained or properly explained by God.
Yes, okay. But promise me that you'll give me time to explain to people why things begin to exist. I
promise you. See, here's the thing.
Okay.
The show has time limits, and so if it's going to take you 40 minutes to get there, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let you speak. No, here's the thing. Try not to get sidetracked, because all we want to know is what is the evidence from my coming into existence that necessarily or likely leads to God.
Okay. First of all, if you come into existence, there are some options which you have to consider. Basically, there is a verse which speaks about this.
I don't care about verses. I don't care about verses.
I know that.
Let's get to evidence.
I'm speaking about a rational argument presented in a verse. So, regardless of whether it is mentioned in the Quran or mentioned in the Bible or mentioned in any book, one has
just present the argument. I don't need the history of it.
Yes. We came into existence. We could not have been brought into existence by nothing. We could not have been brought into existence by ourselves. Therefore, something external must have brought us into existence.
Yeah, here's the thing, though.
The attributes, and to come to who that creator is, we have to look at the rational arguments for the attributes.
Okay.
Of that creator.
We need to pause, because first of all, I came into existence through a process of my parents having sex, and purely of matter and chemicals and natural things. So what you're talking about isn't so much that my coming into existence is evidence for God, but you seem to be suggesting that the existence of people or the existence of life must be explained by a God. And and the problem is that you're wrong. I
don't believe that.
Well, I'm getting ready to explain it to you.
Yes.
At some point in the universe, there wasn't any living thing, correct?
Okay.
And then, at some later point in time, living things existed, correct?
Yes.
Now, how did living things come to exist?
They came into existence. How they came into existence through the natural causes which led them to that existence. But the question is who brought them into existence?
No. The question is not who. The question is what is the explanation? Because when you say who brought them into when you say who brought them into existence, you are presuming that the answer must be a being. And the correct question is, what is the explanation for life? And if it turns out that it's a being, then the being's the right answer. But the only way you can know that it's a being is to actually provide evidence that it is a being. How do you do that?
Yes.
Go ahead. What's the question? Ask me the question. Ask me the question, Bridgekeeper. I'm not afraid.
Yes, it's okay. But the assumption is that we came into existence. That's the assumption. So if you don't accept this assumption, the questions, they wouldn't make sense.
Well, I think what you mean by come into existence, I agree actually happened, even though I wouldn't call it coming into existence. I would call it a change in the state of matter. But are you going to ask me the third question, or are we moving on?
Yes, if the sum of those creatures, they cannot create themselves.
Jesus Christ.
then the sun cannot create a part of itself. It cannot create a part of itself.
Are you saying it's not possible for two people to have sex and for that to naturally result in a baby?
No, I'm saying that if the creature cannot give rise to itself and the sum of human beings cannot create themselves, how can a human being create you? How can the sum of the...
I'm not created. The answer to your dilemma is that I am not created. I am the natural product of human... I am the natural... I'm going to hang up. I'm going to hang up. I am the natural product of humans procreating. There's nothing supernatural or spectacular about it. And saying that I can't create life just by going, there's my offspring, that it requires some physical process, doesn't in any way lead. Your thing is the creature can't create itself, and this is true for the individual, so it must be true for the whole, which, by the way, is a fallacy. The characteristics of individuals does not necessarily apply to the whole. It doesn't mean that no human being could do this.
Yes, but in some cases...
Oh, my God.
Doesn't it? In some cases, it does not.
In some cases, it does not. Do you have evidence that it doesn't?
It does in some cases. For example, if you have...
Well, if it does in some cases, then your argument's moot already.
No, it does in some cases. The fallacy of composition doesn't apply.
Does it apply to human beings procreating?
It doesn't apply.
How do you know? How do you know? Do you have examples of human beings creating life other than through procreation?
No. I'm saying that if your components have a beginning, then you must have a beginning. The sun must have a beginning. That's what I'm saying.
So God had a beginning? So God had a beginning?
How does this relate to this?
Well, I mean, I realize that we're not components of God, but you're advocating for God as some sort of necessary cause.
Yes.
Okay. How do you know that? How do you know that God is how do you know that there is a cause that is external to nature, and how do you know that cause is God?
I don't call God a cause. That would be the philosophers who call him a cause.
Okay, then I'll talk to philosophers. Thanks. Because if you're going to present philosophical arguments for God's existence and never present any evidence, you should learn what evidence is, not just the argument, and then bow out when I get to the difficult questions as if I need to talk to philosophers, then we'll have philosophers call in, because I'm convinced that even the theologians that understand this stuff better than you or I do are also a monumental waste of time. But
please don't call in if you're philosophers.
At least not while John's here.
Yeah, my eyes glaze over.
Just send me an email.
Hi. Thank you very much for getting me on the call, and you guys are doing an amazing job, and I know it's getting late for you as well. I will get to
So it says here that atheists asking for evidence of God is a fallacy. Which fallacy is that?
So basically, I was thinking that atheism, as you define it, is a lack of belief, which basically means that you might have made some effort to, look for evidences of God. Is it so?
So atheism is I'm not convinced that there's a God. It may also be I'm convinced there is no God. It may depend on the God as to whether you take a strong or weak stance. But in either of those cases, if someone is saying a God exists, how is asking for evidence for that claim a fallacy?
Right. Because religions are basically a belief system. And if you are asking for evidence of God and that is given to you, then what's the belief? I mean, that is then known to you, isn't it?
Okay, so religions are belief systems, but the claim there is a God is a claim about something that exists.
Yeah, exactly.
So how is it ever a fallacy to ask for evidence for a claim that something exists?
Right. So there won't be evidence of God that you might find, but you might find signs that might be
You're not even coming close. So somebody says X exists, and I say, give me evidence that X exists. How am I committing a fallacy?
you're not. It's absolutely right that you know.
Okay, your entire topic here was atheists asking for evidence of God is a fallacy. Did the call screener get it wrong, or did you?
No. I did put it that way because you see, religion systems or our belief systems. When it comes to belief systems, then asking for these kind of things are not right.
No, I have plenty of beliefs, and they're based on evidence. A belief belief is just merely being convinced that something is true or likely true, right?
Is true or likely true? Yeah, definitely, sure.
Yeah,
but it's probably not from based on evidence.
Bullshit. Almost I would like for everything that I believe, everything that I am convinced of, I would like for that to be based on evidence. What belief could someone reasonably think is true in the absence of evidence that it's true?
If you see signs of of the claim,
that's called evidence.
Oh, okay. Actually, when I went to talk to many of these atheists and everything, they put the evidence for the existence of God.
Right. So, for example, if I see signs of deer in my backyard, I might not see a deer, but if I see deer tracks and deer poop, those are signs that deer are in my that are going through my backyard at some point. There might not be deer there right now, but I know that there are deer and they are going through my backyard at some point.
And if Tracy tells me that she's had deer in her backyard and I say, what's the evidence? And she shows me the tracks and the poop, right. Now I have evidence.
Yeah, you're very right. That there has to be something verifiable, testable, that leads to, by induction or something.
Well, sure. Yes, okay. That's evidence.
I believe that induction is not, considered for atheists as a reliable method to say that.
No. It's not for atheists. Deductive reasoning is such that the premises necessarily lead to a true premises necessarily lead to a true conclusion, and inductive inferences are that this isn't. It doesn't matter whether you're an atheist or not as to whether or not this is reliable, and so this is about whether or not the conclusion is consistent with that. So inference and induction, we live our lives by that. They're pretty damn reliable. They're just not absolutely reliable in the way a deductive argument would be. But it doesn't matter. It's not like atheists have a different view of inductive arguments than non-atheists. But okay, so I'm confused at what the point is because you started off with this. So let me see if we agree.
I think so because my point was that there might not be like absolute evidence of existence of God, but there has to be like signs.
Okay,
but here's a problem. Remember the example I gave of the deer where I said there's deer tracks and deer poop, right? And that's a sign that a deer has gone through the yard. The problem with that, it's not a problem. My example is not a problem, but the reason it's different than a God is that we know what deer tracks look like, and we know what deer poop is. Like you can follow deer around and see them poop and see them leave tracks, and know that when you see that track, it's a deer track. Now, if
I could have gone and picked up deer poop and scattered it all over Tracy's yard and then stamped.
But here's the thing, though: if me and Matt were astronauts and we went to another planet and we found some kind of weird stuff on the planet that kind of reminded us of animal tracks. But if it didn't, we wouldn't know what it was because we're not familiar with that planet. So we would see something and we might actually be able to say, it kind of resembles tracks. This looks like the same type of thing as an animal track on Earth, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, we wouldn't have, we couldn't conclude that it was necessarily a track of a living being, right, or which living being it was.
Or what on that planet might make something that looks like a track that may or may not be anything alive.
So is there any belief that would be justified for someone to hold without evidence that warrants that belief?
There would be any belief. It depends on what belief are we talking about. For instance,
So is your position that God exists, but we don't have evidence for that?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So you are convinced.
Then you know that God exists, then you don't have any belief. It's like saying,
No, stop. Pause. Let's be careful with this because I don't want language barriers to get in the way of this. Is it your position that God exists?
I believe that God exists. Yes.
Okay, so,
So it is your position that God exists. That's all belief means. Belief just means you are convinced that the claim is true. Are you convinced that God exists is a true claim?
I have 100% belief, but
no. I didn't ask about confidence level. I don't need 100% of anything. Are you convinced that a God exists?
If convinced means absolute certainty.
No. Nothing. I'm not asking about certainty. I don't think you can be absolutely certain about anything. Are you convinced that a God exists?
If someone says it's true that a God exists, would you say that's a correct statement?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Now,
Matt,
do you think there is evidence that warrants reaching the conclusion?
Oh, yes.
What is it?
Okay. So there are these, like, for instance, you won't get evidence for the existence of God, but you would get signs.
Okay. I'm done.
All right. Okay. We're going to let that go. We have pizza.
So I'm an atheist, but my girlfriend is a Muslim, right? So she sometimes accuses me of not not fully not sacrificing enough for her because I don't partake in Ramadan with her. I didn't give up pork for her. What else? I don't pray. Other things. Yeah, so she says that I don't really sacrifice enough for her in that aspect.
It sounds to me like she's muddied the waters between her religious beliefs and her maybe need for affection or approval or whatever from you. And I think it'd be wise for you guys to separate those issues.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not like a religious expert, or a relationship expert or psychologist.
We're not marriage counselors here.
But those sound a little like red flags to me in any relationship, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, what's it called? I'm a Muslim, and I have a question. I've been watching you guys for almost 2 years now, and
thanks for watching.
Thank you. In Islam, we believe that everybody will rise after death in the day of judgment. And obviously, it's atheism. They believe once you die, nothing happens. But my question is, if Islam was true, and then you guys did rise up, what would your reaction be? That's the only question I have.
Oops.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd probably have some questions about, the God, saying, hey, how come, you didn't make things more obvious to us?
Right. But, I mean, obviously at that point where this unexpected thing happens, there's not a lot to do at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, except ask for more information and then ask if it's, if it's okay if he would please not torture me forever.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I know you guys have to leave soon. It's just, for me, I don't know if do you guys believe that Hitler was a good person?
No.
Who?
Hitler.
Oh, Hitler, no.
I mean, you wouldn't be asking that question if you didn't think the answer was obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's hard for me to believe a man like Hitler killing 6 million innocent Jews and a woman that's innocent all her life, at the end of the day, when they both die, they both will be in the same situation. Just a warm buffet in a grave.
Sure, but would Anne Frank wind up in heaven under Islam?
Excuse me?
Would Anne Frank, one of the most famous victims of the Holocaust, who was a Jew, would she wind up in heaven under Islam?
Well, for me, to be honest with you, I don't know too much about, I know Islam, but like, if we don't know the question, we really can't answer it. But
okay.
What I do know
well,
is
then that's not a very good metric of saying that Hitler would be treated differently than his Jewish victims. It seems very likely that under the doctrines of Islam, a lot of the Jews would wind up in hell, as much as Hitler, maybe with Hitler.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's it called? What I believe that Islam teaches us that if the people that had no knowledge about Islam, God wouldn't do unjust for them in the day of judgment. Like he wouldn't just put you in hell without you knowing. Like if you had a good life and you never knew about Islam, that's unjust if God just throws you in the hellfire. I mean, that's my opinion. I know you guys have a different opinion.
So
yeah.
if I were ignorant of Islam and I died, I could get to heaven. But if you told me about Islam and then I died without accepting it, then I would probably go to hell?
No, like if you guys in your heart, you see the truth, but you deny it. That's what we believe. Not like
okay. But if I didn't know about it in the first place, I'd be clear, right?
And the day of judgment, we believe that you're gonna find the truth, and God is gonna judge you with just. He wouldn't unjust anyone. You know, it's gonna be everything is gonna be just.
Okay. What if Hitler decided to accept Islam on the day of judgment?
No. I'm sorry. No. In your lifetime, like Hitler lived a bad life. What I believe, he killed innocent people, and I know he's what's it called? And when he died, that's it. Your test is over. We believe life is a test.
Okay.
So Anne Frank could be in hell, and she could be Hitler's roommate for all we know.
Yeah, but it's
not a great moral system.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's it called? Yeah, I just wanted to know your opinions, and you guys, you know. And I just wanted to know about what would you guys feel. You know, I just felt like, for me, my opinion, I just feel like that's unjust. A lady that's innocent and Hitler both are going to end up the same situation. You know, that's my only question. But and I know I can't prove there's a God because I've been watching you guys shows a lot, and a lot of people don't never show proof. You know, it's really hard. You know, but at the same time, we can't disprove there's a God, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I told you we had a short time left, and now it's over.
All right. We've got Ishmael in South Africa. You're on with Dave and Matt.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
So I'm a believer. I'm a Muslim.
Okay.
I just had a few questions to ask Matt, not so much in terms of a debate format, more discussion so I can understand some concepts. Matt usually gives the example of the gumball machine for the burden of proof. And I think it can be stated in another way using the coin. Like example, if someone had to flip a coin, and the theist would be the person saying, I know it's tails, and the atheist or agnostic would be the person saying, I don't know what's the outcome, but I'm open to either possibility. Is that like a correct statement of the analogy?
Freaking perfect, or pretty close to perfect. The reason I don't use a coin is because it's at least hypothetically possible for a coin to land on edge, so it's not a proper 50-50 proposition, which is why I use gumballs, because even and odd numbers are in fact a 50-50 proposition. But everything else about that, the only correction I make is that the theist is claiming that it came up heads, and the atheist says, I don't believe that it came up heads, which is not the same as saying I believe it came up tails.
Totally.
It's not so much, it's not just I'm not aware, it's I don't believe your claim. What's your reason for that claim?
Mm-hmm. But okay, because I was literally about to ask something about whether the coin lands on its side.
Yeah, that's why I don't use the coin example. Now if we move outside of that analogy to where we're talking about whether or not a God exists, we don't even have a third option. Either some God exists or no God exists. Those are the only two options. They are exhaustively mutually exclusive. Either the proposition some God exists is either true or not true. Mm-hmm. And with only two options, how do you tell which of those two is more probable? You don't. Unlike the coin, we can take measurements, we can analyze, we can investigate evidence for what a coin's probability is. we have no way to assess the probability of a God or whether a specific God more probably exists than not. So there's two different ways. There's two different ways of whether or not it's a possibility. One is an epistemic possibility, and the other one's a kind of metaphysical possibility. But it works best when we have concrete examples.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I can. Okay. So.
Well, I can. You're a Muslim, right?
Right.
So you believe that Allah is real.
Right.
Why?
Well, okay. If you have to start. Right now, obviously, I was born into the Muslim faith, so that's how it all starts.
But you and I would hope you and I would agree, because we agreed on this stuff, that what religious tradition you were born into has no bearing on whether or not it's true.
No, definitely. No, that's not.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to double check, because I asked you why you believe, and you started with something that I think we'd all recognize as irrelevant. So.
No, definitely. But I'm like, the reason I believe obviously starts off from there, because that's where. It started off there because I was born into it. And then after that, obviously now as an adult, I have better reasons.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah. So, so from there, then when a person starts looking into things as a Muslim, and then first, I'd agree, I'd have to assume that most people don't even question this thing and just keep believing whatever they're believing.
I would agree with you again.
Yep. I am studying it to a certain extent and whatever. And before that, nothing seemed to logically contradict about the whole thing. I know that's not a proof or anything in and of itself.
Okay, so there's a second or third thing that isn't why you believe or anything relevant. Can we get to why you actually believe?
Okay, here I get to the point. Well, the strongest proof that I'd have to give is the Quran itself, some of the claims that it makes and some of the things that it shows. And I wouldn't say that any of these things could be shown to be definite to another person. But as we mentioned earlier, reasonable probability, looking at things and considering the fact that I first of all assume that there is a prime mover or a first cause.
Well, there's your problem.
Why would you assume that?
I mean, that seems... So here's the problem. If your reason for believing is based on an assumption, which essentially is the conclusion... Now you've got a circular argument. If you begin by assuming there must be a prime mover, now you're looking for what that prime mover is.
Yeah, you've just made a choice to believe in the one that you were born into. If you're making an assumption that there's a God to begin with, then now you're just going to go with the one that you were born in with, and you've looked for good reasons to believe that, because after all, that's where you fit. But the assumption that there's a God is the problem to begin with.
No, okay, I probably should have used better choice of words. I didn't mean, I said assume, but I meant it's not that I haven't looked at to me, when I look at the argument, whether the argument based on the fact that there's change in the world, specificity, finitude, these sort of things, which indicate to a prime mover. I thought that when I said assume, that was probably a mistake on my part. Well, I meant things like the fact that
we've got a big problem here. And of course, we're running up with a potential limited time, because after several examples of things that were irrelevant, we tried to move to something more specific. And your specific was, well, the Quran says some things, which you never pointed what any of them are, that you found impactful or convincing. And then it's because you already believed in a prime mover, because that is an inference you make because of, we'll just stick with one word that you mentioned, specificity, which I would argue most likely the thing that you're talking about with regard to specificity is also an inference. You are looking at the way things work and inferring that those things are specified to work in that way by an intelligence, rather than recognizing that they are following natural law and physics and chemistry, and that the specificity that you see and want to put in there is not something that is, it's not like there was a being that said, yep, here's how we're going to dictate how this works, but is instead us trying to make sense of how things work.
Okay, so let's just, if we're looking at it from I mentioned four things. The easiest one to explain would probably be change, the fact that whatever movement caused this current movement and the one before it and the one before it and so on, eventually leads to a prime mover. That sort of thing I'm looking at. And I know it's an inference and it might not be.
It doesn't
logically,
okay, so first of all, it doesn't lead to a prime mover necessarily. You don't have any way to rule out an infinite regress, despite the potential abstract issues that people raise with an infinite regress, which I addressed last week on the show by talking about Zeno's paradox. It's a matter of how you perceive these things. You are seeing, oh, well, there must have been something that began it all. Well, our modern cosmology has the best current example that supports the evidence is the Big Bang cosmological model, which may or may not be accurate or completely accurate. But what we do know is that prior to a very short period of time immediately after the expansion, prior to that, we don't have any ability to explore. We don't have any ability to investigate. We don't even have a reason to think that there was time before that. And so we are at a point then when it comes to the origin of the universe, or why is there something rather than nothing, where the only reasonable answer is, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And you must realize, Ismail, that of course, living over here, we usually deal with Christians more than Muslims, I guess, in my experience anyway, my circle of people. But if you start with the baseline that there must be something that started this thing, that there's a creator, there's a force out there of some kind, let's just call it God. If you start with that baseline, then every religion then goes down its own road with their own holy book. I mean, Christians over here will do the same thing you're doing with the Quran, where they'll say there's all these things in the Bible that we say that this happened and that happened and this what makes sense to me. And so you must realize that all these religions who are exclusive to one another and exclusive of one another and all claim to be the way, truth, and life are competing against one another, and they can't all be right. You realize that, right?
Yeah, but like in our worldview as Islam, we accept like Christianity and Judaism to be previously correct religions. So they wouldn't
That's not possible.
How is that possible?
That is what Muslims say, but it's only because they don't actually understand Christian doctrine. Because, and I'm not going to beat you up for this, but during my debate with Cy Ten Bruggencate, he made the point, because he argues with Muslims quite frequently, that if Muslims' views on Christianity is true, then Christianity must be true, which means Islam is false.
Exactly.
And Cy is not wrong. One of the few areas where he's not wrong, because if your view, if a Muslim view of Jesus is that he was just a prophet, and the Christian view is that he is co-equal with God and died, those two things are now in conflict. So in much the same way that there's no such thing as Judeo-Christian, that's a marketing ploy in order to get Jews and Christians to work together towards a common goal, what you're actually advocating is like Muslimianity. And that's not a real thing either. And so while Muslims will constantly say, oh, we accept Christianity as a proper prior truth, it's only because you don't know what it says. If Christianity is true, Islam cannot be true.
Yeah, if the current day Christianity is not true, or is true, obviously Islam cannot be true. But I meant that we accept Jesus as a messenger and Moses as a messenger and that sort of thing. Not that.
Well, there's another one of your problems, because you don't have any reason to think that Jesus even necessarily existed, let alone that you have any accurate representation of his words. You have even less reason to think that Moses existed or had any accurate representation of word. So really, this is marketing. This is, we're not saying your religion is completely false. Clearly there are some truths there, and it's because we're tied together at Isaac and Ishmael. And that's the only reason that Muslims even acknowledge this sort of thing, is because all of these are Abrahamic religions. And so if we're going to go back to the same point, the same God, you have to say, oh, well, yes, we follow Allah, and Abraham and Sarah had Isaac and Ishmael. Well, Sarah didn't have it, but you got Isaac and Ishmael, and it leads off in different directions. And now we've got this, the true prophet. And the problem here is that all of those are just claims. Mm-hmm. They are no more better grounded or founded than the claims of any of the religions you don't accept.
Okay, so but back to the infinite regress, I just want to know, I also called in with the intent of getting your take on the infinite regress. I didn't listen last week, so I just want to know, is it not necessarily true that there can't be an infinite regress?
I have no idea. This is the problem here is how we think about infinities. It is an incredibly difficult concept to grasp, and we are not even good at grasping the much simpler concepts. And so when somebody says, well, everything couldn't have existed forever. I agree with you. Our understanding of the universe is that, I didn't exist forever, this planet didn't exist forever, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know that the substance from which this universe expanded, I'm reluctant to call it a singularity or point because then we'll get emails, but I don't know that wasn't infinite. I also don't know whether or not the thing that if there is some external thing that made the universe expand rather than something it did on its own, I don't know anything about that thing and whether or not it's endless or infinite or not. And so when people say, oh, well, we need to invent a God as a prime mover to start this all off, otherwise we can't do anything. Mm-hmm. Well, that God is supposedly infinite, right? How can God do anything if he's infinite? If I can't if I can't get here on an infinite timeline, then God can't do it either.
No, but I mean that's slightly separate things. I mean the infinite timeline would be a collection formed by successive addition from the beginning of time till now, whereas God being infinite wouldn't necessarily have anything to do with the beginning of the universe till now, that sort of time.
Well, is your view of Allah that he is outside of space and time?
Yeah.
Then how can he do anything if he's outside of time? Because all action is temporal. It requires movement. It requires action, and outside of time, you can have none of that, right?
Yeah. See, that's the problem I have. Yeah. We even if we arrived at a conclusion that there's a God that started all this, that made this happen, that spun this thing into action, we're then wrestling with which God and which brand of faith do we buy into, and then we're back to where we started the conversation.
Kinda.
Whereas we don't. How do you know it's yours? How do I know it's mine? How do we? They all compete with one another.
That's the thing is, Ismail is trying to skip that part.
Exactly.
To say, okay, once we begin with there must be a prime mover, here's why I think it's the right one.
And my bigger issue.
And I'm saying I have no idea that there's a prime mover, and I don't see any justification for it. So all of your, it'd be like if we assume that there's a living dinosaur, or a living ape creature hiding in the hills in Montana.
Then how are we going to fight him? Then we start there.
Let me tell you why I think it's Bigfoot and not Yeti. When I'm sitting here saying, why do we think there's this thing out there in the first place? And at least with Bigfoot, there are people who can say, oh, well, we found footprints or fur, or there's this shaky cam footage, and then we can discuss whether or not that's enough to reach a reasonable conclusion about it. It turns out it's not, and we know there are forgeries.
Shocking.
But when we ask people, how do you reach this conclusion about a prime mover, what we get are philosophical arguments that aren't supported by any evidence, and they tend to include concepts like infinity that we pretend we understand when we probably don't.
Yeah.
You're right. Just one more thing, sometimes you say, okay, we'll grant the prime mover, but how do you know it's conscious? Okay, that's obviously skipping the first step.
Sure.
But and then Cosmic Skeptic once gave the example of sometimes we see things which are first movers, which are conscious, like a person dropping something, and sometimes we see things which are first movers that are not conscious, like the cloud dropping rain.
Sure.
So how do we know which first mover, is this first mover conscious or not?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm thinking isn't also that analogy, I was just thinking about it, because the cloud it's something made the cloud, there was something before that. So is it worthy to use that as an analogy for first mover?
Okay.
I don't know if you know what I'm saying.
So it's always going to be valid as an analogy for first mover because analogies aren't direct, they are analogous. And so, there was something, the cloud formed from water vapor. There's an entire water cycle here. And so you would have to get back to make it directly analogous. How did the water cycle begin? We know what the water cycle is. We know clouds drop rain, it comes down, it gets soaked in, and then it gets evaporated and everything else, and then you get clouds again, you get this water cycle going. When did the water cycle begin and how?
No, I don't know. I'm saying
I'm legitimately asking you, when did the water cycle begin and how did it begin?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't either. And if that's a good enough answer for us to ask to give for that water cycle, then why isn't it a good enough answer for the origin of the universe, which we know millions of times less about?
Yep.
It would, but like this is a question that has like a lot of impact. Whereas when did the
doesn't matter how impactful the question is.
Can't make up an answer.
The only issue is how accurate is the answer, not how impactful is the question. There are massive questions that could have massive impact on everything, and yet the right answer to them for the entirety of human history, right up to now, is I don't know. And my objection here is that there are people who are claiming that they do know.
No, as I said, okay, you just asked why isn't, I don't know, good enough answer. So I'm saying we'd want to search more and try better in the case of this than the water cycle.
I agree. We should try more and search and then put together evidence to show that the conclusion that we're leaning towards or accepting is most likely correct. Isn't that what we would do?
Yeah.
Why hasn't religion done that? Not just yours, any of them. Where is the investigative process and evidence that leads to the conclusion that that particular religion is right?
Okay, so I know we've taken up a lot of time so far, but when it comes to I'm going to be skipping the first step of the prime mover, but just to give you like a quick,
we're skipping all the steps of the prime mover, and we're gonna go on because I got some other callers to get to. But here's what I'd like you to do, and everybody else do this as an exercise. Go back and listen to this call again, and anytime I asked a question that got a simple, straightforward, direct, easy answer, Nate, make a note of that. And anytime I asked a question that should have the same answer that the question before it got, where what I got from you was something completely unrelated to the question or dodging or dancing, make a note of that. This is the exercise that this entire show has been about forever, for as long as I've been doing it, which is, let me ask you a question. When did the water cycle begin and how? And you quickly say, I don't know. Now, your answer probably should have been, it started at the time when Allah said that it was going to be started and in the way that Allah dictated that it would be started. That's probably the answer as a Muslim you should have given, because now you're not saying that you know the specifics, but that you know there was a God behind it, because that's exactly what you're doing with the origin of the universe. And yet when I ask about the water cycle, I get an I don't know. When I ask about the nature of evidence and demonstrating these sorts of things with analogies, with coins, and other things that are specific, I get answers that are reasonable. You and I are on exactly the same page on every one of those. And yet when we get to religion, it's a tap dance. Mm-hmm. That is important. We're out of time. Think about that. Call us back another time.
Let's go to Mark in Montenegro. It says that the Quran is more valid than the Bible. Why bash it for the bad things? Okay. You want to talk about the Quran?
I think I'm going to try my best now to explain what I meant last time, because you guys said, like, what am I trying to say in the book of Quran, or I wasn't trying to say in the book of Quran or Bible. I'm trying to say in both of those books. What I meant by all that saying is that both of those books have a lot of knowledge in them.
Okay.
And a lot of philosophy points of view on life. Mm-hmm. And also they are kind of historical books. It explains the way of the living back in that time, etc., etc., etc. It does have bad things in them. Nobody's saying they don't.
Okay.
But what is the point of throwing the books away because they have bad things in them? A lot of books have bad things in them.
Who's throwing it away?
Throw them away. They're just books.
I am.
Why not keep them? Why? There are a lot of books that, teach about historical figures that are pretty bad and done horrible things. But we just don't throw them away. We just teach about them in school, etc., etc.
Right.
Now, people taking them literally, of course I'm against that. Like taking, rape, if you rape someone's daughter, then you have to marry them. Could you imagine the psychological damage doing to those women? But a lot of things in those, when you read them like a complete book, you see their point of view in life, etc., etc. So why throw the whole books? That was my point when you said what are you trying to save?
I understand.
To save them as books.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of good stuff in there. There are a lot of good lessons. There's a lot of children's stories that have probably made me a better person. But there is a video that I actually saw of Tracy Harris speaking about the harm of religion, and the way she put it was, if there's dog shit in the brownies, are they good?
Well, you're always going to have gullible people who are going to believe whatever you tell them.
Well, but my point is that if there's poison in something that is otherwise good, at what point does it become poisonous?
Yeah, it kind of does, but I think you would agree with me that if a person is intelligent, after a certain age, is going to give up on that, take the good lesson, throw the bad things away.
Look across the world. There are people who are taking the Bible extremely literally. Look, there are countries dedicated to the Quran.
And in this country, they're trying to pass laws constantly to oppress me and other people because of their book.
Okay. For example, hold on. I was taught by my religion that wasting seed is a sin. And I'm sorry for the language, but what I mean is when you're going to finish and then you don't. So
you're talking about masturbation? Or
as an example?
That or pulling out, any kind of thing like that. I'm sorry if I'm not allowed to say that.
You're allowed.
But that kind of thing is a sin, okay?
They have a way of explaining it. I'm not standing for it, but they kind of make their point because, at least from my point of view, both of those books actually they talk a lot about procreation, how good it is to spread the seed.
Well, but they say that you're required to spread the seed. Do you understand that, Mark? That it is a requirement. If you are a female and have female parts, it is your requirement to produce more people to serve this imaginary being.
Yeah, I understand.
Right? And in addition to that, they teach that there is such a thing as a soul, and that soul is present in a body of a human being in its earliest stages. At what point we call it, what is it before it's a fetus, a zygote?
A cell.
It's cell. From the moment sperm meets egg is what I was taught. That is when life begins. And I don't think that that's right. I think that there are different ways to interpret that. But the fact is that there are different ways to interpret that. There are people who see it this way and see it that way. Therefore, there is no right or wrong, black and white answer. And so you have a lot of people in politics that are single-issue voters and solely vote a certain way because of this one religious ideal that has been shoved down their throat their whole lives. Do you understand why that's a big deal?
I do understand. But again, would you, according to you, or at least how I understood you, you'd completely ban those books?
Yes. Actually, no. I think we can learn a lot from them, from our mistakes, from the fact that people were so brainwashed by them. We can learn what is it about these books that were so intriguing, and can we replicate it in a better and more honest way?
I think you're also going with the way you're talking with ego. I bet you were hurt by religion, the way you're talking.
Ego? I'm talking with ego?
That's pretty brutal, dude.
I have that feeling.
Yeah, to assume someone's comments are not logical because they've been hurt is not a good road to go down.
What have I said that's not logical? What have I said that's just ego?
Well, for example, to ban the books, etc., etc.
Well, I took it back. I took that back right after I said it, and I said, actually, you're right, I wouldn't.
We're going in a better direction. We are going in a better direction. And also, one thing which the whole internet bashed me on that, the comment section about when they say, like, do not have sexual intercourse with a woman when they're on their period and so on. You got to look at it from their perspective because, back then it was not sanitary. They didn't have...
back then it wasn't sanitary? What wasn't sanitary?
It had water resources and hygiene was not at the top, So you can kind of see what they meant by that. It didn't have sanitary napkins or whatever. What do I know back then?
I can see people that are confused.
Yeah?
Well, if the book has something that, let's give you a generous interpretation, something that was valuable 3,000 years ago but is not valuable now, okay, it's not valuable now then.
So when I said, like, in the Quran there is mentioned evolution, you said that, so what? Like, come on, like...
I'll go with so what.
But do you want to know why I said so what?
Yeah, I would like to know.
If it is in there, if that is true, and I said, so what? Let's say it is. Would that mean anything for anybody outside of you?
Of course.
Why?
What does it mean?
when Charles Darwin, discovered evolution or found out about evolution, we didn't say so what.
Well, but
a lot in science.
Well, okay, let me
go for it. Go for it.
Here.
Yeah. Let me try this. Let's pretend for a moment that the Quran mentions and explains evolution. Is that the position you're taking?
It mentions it. It doesn't really explain it.
Okay, great. I'll backtrack. The Quran mentions evolution.
It does mention.
Okay. Just I got a logic process here. Let me work with this. It mentions it, but no human could understand what the Quran was telling them until 1,200 years later when Charles Darwin figured it out. So the information was without value.
You cannot know that for sure, because it quite clearly said that person were made in stages.
But it wasn't clear, because it took 1,200 years, and 1 billion people followed that book, and not a single one of them were able to read it and figure out what evolution was from that book. So it has no value. It only shows evolution to anybody that wants to squint and turn their head the right way only after a human using science explained evolution. So that book has no value for that.
Of course, the Quran as a scientific explanation for everything.
Okay, so it's not everything. It's just the one thing you claimed.
You said that the Quran has a scientific explanation for everything?
Not for. If I said for everything, I take it back. For
okay.
me,
okay.
I was wrong for that.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
So give me one thing that the Quran explained scientifically before a human figured it out.
Well, let's say it did. Does it matter? Why does it matter?
Okay, well, I just proved to you that that's not true for evolution, and you won't accept it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
You said the Quran mentions evolution, and I'm telling you that for 1,200 years, no one, not any one of the 1 billion followers of that faith, were able to use that information and produce anything of value. And then Charles Darwin figured it out with science and not the Quran. And only after that point can someone look backwards in time and say it was in the Quran. Whoop-de-doody-doo.
Phil, listen. Do I have to sit down? Because I think a lot of times my phone interrupts, so I don't get, my say. Maybe, I'm not saying they did, but maybe they did. You never know. Maybe they did, but that knowledge got lost somewhere in the way, and they had no idea what they were talking about.
I believe you. They had no idea what they were talking about.
It could be, but like more than in 30 places, and if I'm not wrong, in 40-something places, what I read and found out, it mentions that thing, like how people were not the way they are today, the way they look now, that they came from almost, it says like different species. It comes from something else, and we made him in different stages.
But if the only thing I can find of value in science in the Quran or the Bible.
No, not that. Let me finish. There are more things.
Well, hold on.
But there's more things that are just like the example we just went through. If you can look back at a book 1,600 years ago and find something that's scientific only now that we understand what the science is, even if it's truly there, it was worth nothing because no one could figure out what to do with it. So even if the book explains in detail what DNA is, no one understands it.
I have a question, Mark. I think this will help. Can I give this one last go?
Yeah, but please let me finish my sentence first, because you interrupted my thought process, and then I'm not...
No. Your point is that there's a lot of good things in the Bible, and there's other... You're trying to point out all the good things, right?
Yes,
that those override the bad. Is that your point?
No. What I'm trying to say, they had a lot of forward thinking back then.
Okay,
It
so
doesn't translate for today, maybe, but...
So Star Trek.
No point to your show.
Mark.
Regard both of those books, which are doing a pretty good job. I'm not standing for them, but they had some pretty forward thinking for back then. Why back then?
No, they didn't.
Mark, it was his opinion.
Yeah, well, it is his opinion. He's wrong.
So in my opinion, Star Trek was pretty forward thinking for its time.
Oh, Jesus
And there's
Christ.
a lot of good stuff. There's actually some really good logic stuff in Star Trek. There's some really good stuff. Does that mean that there are these spaceships that can travel through time and fight aliens?
What does God need with the spaceship?
But do you see what I'm saying? There's some good stuff there. Why can't I have that as my Bible?
Jesus Christ.
Exactly. That is my point. That Bible, it looks as illegitimate to me in a real world as the Bible does.
Nobody's saying God did that. Nobody.
Yes, they are.
God back then.
Where were we? Andrew in Minnesota. Hello.
Yeah, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Great, thanks.
Great. So my main question, I guess, the main point that I'm looking for, I work with two pretty devout Muslim gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up in topic pretty much all the time that the Quran is perfect. It's the perfect word of God. It's
what kind of place?
What
kind of place do you work at, if you don't mind me asking? I'm not going to ask for details, but
no problem. Honda car dealership.
Oh, okay, got it.
Pretty diverse bunch of employees. It's pretty cool.
Sure, yeah.
Really
I mean, and good for them,
out.
I would say.
Oh yeah.
So go on.
And I mean, their main point really that comes up is that the way that the, I guess, linguistics are laid out in the Quran is something that can never be replicated by human beings, which I've looked up a little bit, but I haven't really seen any good points refuting that. Obviously, I don't believe that, but
I think it's a good policy to be honest and say that you don't know that much about Islam, including, when you are talking directly to Muslims. But the problem is, like, if you don't know something about Islam, it seems like it's up to the people who are trying to talk you into being a Muslim to convince you, basically, or to present this information in a way that is persuasive.
Right.
And it's perfectly all right to just, to just listen to these arguments and say, I don't know, you could flip through a couple of passages of the Quran. I have. It's not that good writing, personally. I mean,
well, of course, you have to speak the original language.
Oh,
to
sure.
Absorb the text,
There'd be a lot.
Whatever
That'd take a lot of effort. That'd take a lot of effort to determine the truth or the falsity of that claim. But there'd be some people who could. What I would do is I would ask the person, and I do this with Christians all the time. They'll email me and they'll say, "Have you ever heard this argument?" And once in a while, they surprise me with an argument I hadn't considered because it had some detail that was left out of other arguments. And I'll say, "Oh no, I really hadn't considered this before." And they'll say, "Well, what do you think of it?" And I'll ask it, "Is this why you believe? Is this the reason? Is this the argument that if I were to debunk it, would convince you that your religion is false?" No, this is not why I believe. Well, why do you believe? Let's talk about that. It's about talking in terms of concrete examples.
Sure, yeah.
Why do you believe? You don't believe because of this argument, and the Muslim who has produced that argument for you didn't believe because of that argument. What you want to do is, if you don't know the specifics, which I don't in this case, when it comes to the Quran, I would simply say, why do you believe? Tell me the real reasons why you believe. And usually it comes down to I was raised that way. Now, once that is out on the boards, I usually say something like this. Now, given the proliferation of religions around the world that are taught on mama's knee, we know that they all can't be true. In fact, given the numbers of them, we know that most of them are false. And so you have to agree with me that learning your religion on mama's knee is a notoriously bad way to learn a religion by the odds alone.
Although you're not going to get a theist admitting that the reason they believe is because that's what they learned as kids.
Right. You have to
I've actually come close with both of them. One's from Egypt, one's from Somalia, and they both fully admit that that's what they were raised with. That's what they brought up. And I asked, well, would you believe the Quran was perfect if you had read it or hadn't read it until this point in your life? Would you just now read it and immediately go, oh, that's a perfectly written book? And I think it kind of stuck, but I mean, obviously they weren't like instantly.
Here's a question that occurs to me, which is that these are guys who have lived in both America and, you said, Egypt for one of them, right?
Correct.
And And I think one line of questioning that might yield some interesting results is saying, you know, you've lived in these two places. Isn't it weird how the religion that a person believes in seems to map so strongly to their physical location, that they just happen to believe exactly the same things as most other people around them? And see what kind of reaction that gets, because, you know, they must feel very pressed to defend their faith, specifically because they run into almost nobody in their day-to-day lives who also believes in Islam. And that's kind of unusual if it's just objective truth, isn't it?
We're living in a global society now. Internet can take you around the world in a split second, and there's nobody who can be totally ignorant about the fact that so many people believe differently. But the argument he gave you is not the reason he believed. We have to get beyond trying to answer these arguments. Yes, there are people who can.
An excellent point. I don't want to take up any more of you guys' time. That was really an excellent point. I'll take that to heart.
All right.
Thank you guys so much for the show, and really, really appreciate what you guys do.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for calling, Andrew.
I just saw you're destroying her over there. It's funny.
Yeah, I'll try not to be racist.
What have you got for us today?
Well, so I have all. So let me first say that I'm a Muslim, and I have to say that I've been listening to your guys' show recently for quite some time, and it's very interesting. And I think that you bring a lot of good points, and I've been considering your viewpoints for quite some time.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah. So basically, what I want to present, I want to present this argument that a lot of Muslims they present this kind of argument, and it just there's just something particularly strange about it. Like it's just it's strangely convincing, but I don't know if it should be convincing.
Okay,
but
that's good because it sounds like your bullshit detector is going off. So let's hear it and let's tear it apart.
Okay. Yeah. So basically the first part of this is that in the Quran, the Quran presents a literary and linguistic challenge to humanity. So basically, in the first chapter of the Quran, it presents this challenge. It says that if you doubt that this book was written by God, then produce something like it. And that's supposed to mean not as a subjective literary judgment, but more produce something that's even of similar quality in terms of literary merit.
Okay, we can stop there. We can stop there. That's a fallacy. That something is true until it's shown to be false. So the uniqueness of the Quran, which every book is unique, except for copies of the book, but Christians use the same thing. They talk about the uniqueness of the Bible, the uniqueness of prophecy, the uniqueness of what Jesus supposedly fulfilled, etc. Muslims do the same thing with the Quran. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how unique it is. It doesn't matter whether somebody could produce something remotely similar. That is not a testimony to the truth of the claims within the book, period.
Yeah, so no, I understand what you're saying. So I guess what Muslims are trying to say, they're trying to say that it's inimitable in the sense that
I don't care.
It could not have been written.
That's not relevant. The fact that you couldn't, first of all, I'm not conceding that it's true. I'm saying even if it were true, that doesn't change whether or not this is a book that speaks on behalf of God.
Uh-huh. So, yeah, I guess, well, the thing is that what they're trying to say is, because I've heard this argument from a couple of, I guess, Muslim apologists, and what they're trying to say is basically not
they're trying to say that the only way this book could be unique is if it actually comes from God. That is a bald assertion that they do not demonstrate, that they cannot demonstrate at all. They are snowing you. They are buffaloing you. They are bullshitting you. They bullshitted themselves. They're saying this book is so clearly and obviously important that it must have come from God. No man could produce this book. while simultaneously acknowledging that a man actually, dictated and wrote the book. But they do it with, this is with the guidance of Allah, and no man on its own could produce this, which I don't accept is actually true, but I don't care, because even if it were true that nobody else could produce this other than the individual who did, that doesn't mean that he could only produce it because he was communicating with God. This video for this week, I shit you not, is going to be assuming facts not in evidence, because that's what's happening over and over. And what they're essentially doing is saying, we're convinced that this could only come about from a God, and we will remain convinced until you prove that something like this could come about from something other than God. Here's the problem. You can say that about the Quran. You can say that about the Bible. You can say that about the Bhagavad Gita. You can say that about the Urantia stuff. You can say that about Nostradamus's writings. You can say that about anybody and any
about
writing.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah. No, you could say that about innumeracy, John Allen Paulus's book that I recommend all the time. You could say nobody but John Allen Paulus, with the guidance of a God, could have produced a book like innumeracy. And even if there were no way to demonstrate that was wrong, that does not prove that God was involved.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to shift the burden of proof.
Yeah, it is prove me wrong. And if you've set up an unfalsifiable scenario, the easiest thing you can ever do is say, I'm going to believe until you prove me wrong. And you'll never be proved wrong because you have an unfalsifiable claim. If there's no way to falsify it, it's not a claim worth considering.
Yeah, so that makes sense. I guess, like, the way I think about it is that you have this book, and there had to have been some agent who wrote this book, right? You have a book, there needs to be an explanation for who wrote it, right?
Usually books have authors, yeah.
Yeah, so it has to have an author. So what they're trying to say is that a person could not have written the book.
Okay, prove it.
Whatever, they claim.
If they are claiming it is impossible for a person to write this book without God, they need to actually demonstrate that. It's not up to you to disprove it. You're buying into the thing that they're doing, where they're shifting the burden of proof.
So what I was trying to do is I wasn't trying to say, like, oh, you have to disprove it. I was trying to say,
that's what they're saying.
Yeah, so I was trying to, like, what they do is, like, they like show all these, like, quotes. They give all these quotes from, like linguistic scholars or whatever, and they say, oh, these quotes, they consist of, like, scholars saying, oh, in terms of linguistic merit, like, the Quran is very good or whatever, and it's just like, okay, so that doesn't necessarily mean that it's from God, but you have,
and it doesn't mean it's true.
You have to have some, but you have to have some. You have to, like, there needs to be a best explanation, and you have to rule out other explanations.
Yeah,
like,
but the problem here is that while there is an explanation, that doesn't mean anybody necessarily has access to it at any given point.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that this is pronounced Nader. It would be if it was in the U.S., but you're from the United Arab Emirates, and you are talking about intent behind creation that is found in the Quran, and you are on with Jen and Tracy.
Yes. Hi, Jen. Hi, Tracy.
Hello. Hi.
Okay. Yes, I'm gonna talk about the creation and if there is God or not, that kind of issue. First, the argument put forward in the Quran is the following. There is, he sent, the Lord sent messengers that made miracles. So this is eyewitnesses. There are two types of evidence. There's logical evidence, reasoning, and there's eyewitnesses. So, for example, the Bible is a documentation of eyewitnesses.
Actually, it's not.
Many people.
It's not. The Bible's not got any eyewitness stuff in it.
Why? Because why? Luke, there is Luke, and there is John, and there is
Luke wasn't. They weren't eyewitnesses. Luke even says he wasn't an eyewitness. He said that he went and he researched it and talked to people, and he's reporting back what he heard. So these are not eyewitnesses. But that's not an eyewitness.
I see. Yeah, I mean, they are what do you call it? Testimonies.
Well, they're writing down stories that were verbal.
They have heard it from somebody.
Sure. Yeah, that's not an eyewitness.
That's what I meant. Yeah, it's a transmission by. So they heard it from somebody.
Yeah, it's called hearsay. Yeah.
If that somebody is morally correct, is morally good, then I can trust his.
But we don't know who they heard it from. Right, we didn't get to talk to the people that they talked to, and some of them based it on other books. And these are just, and the stories were written down, decades and potentially like a century later. So these are stories and verbal stories that were finally written down in written form.
We don't know if these people were morally upright or honest, or if they were like flagrant liars and grifters.
So let's stick with the Quran here, because the Bible, it's pretty much, even most Muslims I know pretty much know that there's a lot of problems with the Bible.
Yeah, but the Quran says that he came to confirm what Luke, Matthew, John, and Mark has said. There's a consensus among these four disciples.
There's really, the stories in the Bible, there's no consensus. It's really bad. They have a lot of disputes among them about what happened, like who was there and who saw what, and they're not the same. In fact, there's parts of it that were added later, that about the life of Jesus and even about the resurrection I think it's the end of Mark. I'd have to look it up.
Right.
But one of them, they changed the resurrection story,
there's disagreements about Jesus' birth,
the Bible's really not a good source.
Yeah, but let's see what they have agreed upon. They have the four different sources confirm that Jesus came with miracles.
Well, no, they just report what other people said. That's not the same as confirming that there were miracles.
Before we go on, we talked about this, not me and you, but I've talked about this in the past, like on a recent show, where I basically said I'm happy to take the consensus of historians. And I know that some people don't like that. There are atheists who really don't want me to say that. But I'm willing to take the consensus of historians, that there was, it seems likely that a guy named Jesus lived in some fashion, that the crucifixion was probably, how he died. And again, I know there's people that take issue. Go take issue with historians, change their minds, and then I will change. Then I'll stop using this. But the fact is, historians don't really accept that there were miracles. That we don't. If you go, it's why spectral evidence is not allowed in courts here. I can't go into court and say I saw Jen turn into a cat. And even if there's three people and we all get up and say that Jen turned into a cat, people are going to be like, no, that's ridiculous. Even if there's eyewitness testimony, there's a certain level where we say that's just ridiculous.
Okay, so I wanted to say that the Quran says that the Bible is evidence. Yes, there were some forgeries, but the Quran says says to us that concentrate on what Luke, Matthew, Mark, and agreed that there was Jesus. He came with miracles, and there were forgeries. Yes, the Quran says this, but this is documented. Anyways, I want to talk about the second thing. I want to talk about the creation, the logical, the argument put forward in the Quran that there is intent behind creation, and that there is God. Okay, just.
Is this what you believe, or is this what you're looking up?
No, actually, I want to say for example, the Quran has many verses on the reasoning, the argument behind the creation. For example, it says the meaning in the Quran: the first man on earth he said the Quran says basically that we have to make a relationship and reflect how nature combines the elements of survival.
I would say that's a good idea. The nature combined elements, yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, the meaning I'm gonna say not the exact wordings in the Quran, but the interpretation or the meaning.
Sure.
For example, the first man on earth found himself in the earth with no water to drink. Mother Nature told him, "Don't worry, I will bring the sun close enough to make the sea water nearly evaporate."
Okay, wait. People came from water.
No, actually, I want to present the whole story first. Maybe.
Right, but we already have a problem because evolution is thought to have begun in water and proceeded outward from there, right, like onto land. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's my understanding of that it was probably. That's why finding liquid water on planets is such a big deal.
Well, and in any case, we know that life on Earth would not survive without water. So.
Yeah.
So
whether
probably
we came
there was
from
water before there was people is, I guess, what I'm saying.
Right, there had to be. And we know from geology that water's been around longer than
people.
Yeah, but if you wait for me just until I finish this paragraph, because it will like tell you why how the elements are combining. The elements of survival are combining.
So we're going to get a chemistry lesson.
I'm not sure I'm trusting this book.
It's going to be chemistry. It's going to be cool.
So again, the first man on earth found himself in the earth with no water to drink. Mother Nature told him, "Don't worry, I will bring the sun close enough to make the seawater nearly evaporate." Then the condensation process starts in order to remove the salt for you and bring it back water that quenches your thirst. This is as per the Quran. Not only that, but after the water has fallen, it was preserved in the form of lakes and rivers and ponds and underground water. He found the fruit sweet and digestive. Nature included sugar in the process because it knew that the human body can taste. That man also found varieties, fruits, vegetables, grains. Out of hundreds of wild species, there were livestock, male and female, to promote animal farming. Allah said in the Quran, chapter 16, "And indeed for you, in grazing livestock is a lesson. We give you drink from what is in their bellies between excretion and blood, pure milk." This man also recalled when he was a baby, he didn't have teeth to eat solid food. Nature said, "I'm going to give your mommy 2 bottles of salt milk."
Okay, I have to stop. Wait. I've got to ask. Wait. Where is this going, please? Because I let this go on for like a minute. I watched the clock and I let this go for a minute, and it's like we're basically getting the Genesis story.
Finished.
And how long?
Exactly 2 minutes. Exactly 2 minutes.
Okay.
It doesn't empty until you, the baby, say so. And guess what? I will place pierced soft nipples on the tip of the 2 bottles because nature knew the baby is only able to suck and doesn't have teeth. That will hurt the nipples. Nature was smart. The breast was dual functional. It manufactured the breast to look attractive to the male. This man recalled again when he was in his mom's womb, arrangements again were there to supply him with food and drink. So when you wonder, as Allah said, the possibilities are narrowing down to 0 if somebody had the intent to combine the elements of survival. So my question now is, again, the Quran says the mountains to stabilize the earth crust, the moon every 30 days turns full moon to make account of time.
How did they know that? How did they know that the moon gets full every 30 days?
Yeah.
Like, who told them that?
No, this is, you can see it. But
yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, because you can see it. I mean, what you're doing is describing things that people have observed, and you're saying that according to the Quran, nature has done this. And I tend to agree with that. I just don't agree that it needs Allah to tell us this. I think that this is something that we can observe.
No, Allah is
babies suck on nipples. It's a pretty obvious
and they don't have
thing.
Teeth usually.
Yeah, they don't have teeth, and the moon gets full every 30 days, and none of this is anything but what I would expect ancient people to write as observations. on nature.
Yes.
With some incorrect explanations thrown in, because I would also expect they wouldn't understand evolution and long-term geology theories.
Yeah, I would also expect people who were unaware of our hunter-gatherer past to assume that livestock
would be a normal
and
thing,
grains were already in existence.
Yeah, I was trying to be a little flexible with that and thinking maybe livestock was like a term for animals or something. You know what I mean? Because we're dealing with translation. I don't know. I was being generous, but livestock is not really something that is a natural thing. And neither is farming.
Based on this argument, you don't see that that the elements of survival are combining.
That's not an argument, and I wouldn't say that the elements, because the problem with the story, this is the problem as I see it with the story you're telling, is that people are here and then everything is supplied for people to survive. But what really happened, according to everything that we can find, is that all the stuff was already here, and then things that could survive in the environment arose and survived. And then as the environment changed, some of those things couldn't survive and they died. Other things were able to survive and they evolved. And so what happened is we conformed to an environment because we were able to survive in it, not it was supplied to us as a survival environment to support people. That's the only issue I really have with the little myth.
Okay. So the argument doesn't prove that there is intent behind
not even close.
It's sometimes, I don't know, you might want to think about this, but sometimes it's compared to drawing the bullseye around the arrow.
Yeah,
so
it's actually sharpshooter fallacy.
You shoot the arrow and then it hits the tree and then you go and draw a bullseye around it and say, hey, it's right in the bullseye. So what's happening is everything that we're aware of indicates that there was evolution that resulted in what we've got today. And everything that's around today is obviously the stuff that was able to survive based on what was there. It's kind of incorrect to think of it in terms of we were there as human beings and then the universe supplied everything we need. And when you look at the universe, in fact, you can kind of see that there's a whole lot of stuff in the universe that isn't required for human survival. So it doesn't seem like the universe is really here for people to survive, right? Because look at all the stuff that's out in the universe that if it, supernovas, for example, stars blow up and we still survive. So that star wasn't really necessary for our survival, or else we would have died when it exploded. And so we have a universe that's really not, it doesn't seem to be made to make people survive. It seems like we have grown up in this universe. In fact, there's a really good old Richard Dawkins series called Growing Up in the Universe, where he talks about how evolution works and how you come to match your environment because you are the thing that survived in that environment. I think I understand what you're describing, and I'm thinking that you probably understand my response to it. And do you feel like you had an opportunity to give your position?
Yes, definitely. I had the opportunity.
Okay.
And thank you very much for your program and time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your call.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, thank
Bye-bye.
you.
All right.
I've called the show before, and I think I had a very abrupt ending with Matt last time, and I kind of wanted to apologize.
We would probably want to skip that one. I heard a little bit about it as a heads up, and I would say let's proceed with the new topic.
Yeah, let's not go there.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not really an expert on religion myself, so let's not go there.
Okay.
And I guess a lot of the things that people talk about when they bring up historical things, usually some things, in my opinion, some things we may think is the norm right now. Some things were the norm back then, and even today. For example, the drinking age in America is 18, and in Europe, it's 18. So what can you do? I mean, certain things are just the way they are, and there's really nothing you can do about it. Either you break the law or you don't.
You can alter laws, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's clearly true.
Or get some cough syrup.
So let me see if I can help you out here, because a while back, me and some folks from ACA went down to the local mosque, and we attended an Islam 101 course that was put on by the local group here. And there was, I think, a lot of things we had in common, right? It wasn't like I went in and everything they said I was opposed to. So they were very, for example, pro-hospitality, right? So they viewed their religion as being promoting hospitality. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. And in fact, I mean, I guess it all begins with the traditional Islamic saying, but I want to greet the callers to Assalamu alaikum, which means may peace be on all of you, which I honestly come in peace. I don't want to start any arguments. I don't come here to like badmouth anyone, because Islam teaches me to be tolerant towards people who may not be of my faith.
And I also understand that, you know, just because somebody identifies as Muslim doesn't mean that they might think exactly the same thing that somebody else that identifies as Muslim does. Like there's all different groups.
They're very different groups. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you. Let me go straight out here, and I'll get to the generosity part next. The biggest threat to Islam, and I'm going to say it very clearly, you know, is not people outside of the religion. It's only been the Muslims themselves. If anyone who's really given a chance for non-Muslims and atheists, agnostics, or anyone else who doesn't believe in the faith to badmouth the religion, it's us, because we screwed up so much, and we haven't really been the best examples of our faith. Unfortunately, I'm saying majority of that's why the media highlights those things all the time. I mean, they totally skip the part where there's people who are really good, the progressive Muslims. They don't talk about those at all. It's just that people want to make news out of these things.
Well, let me stop you for a minute, and just first let me just say thank you for saying that. Okay, because we sometimes on the show get on to people in particular religions, not only Islam but Christianity as well, because a lot of times when people behave badly in a religion, people who behave differently or view it differently or have a more liberal view tend to sort of just separate from that, and they don't own it, they won't take responsibility for it, they won't accept that their religion can be interpreted that way or that it can be used that way. So for someone to say, I recognize that there are people that identify also as Muslim that do things that cause problems for Muslims because they're really making trouble for us when they act the way they do, is actually something we don't hear a lot, and I wish we heard more of from people. Egypt is a really good example, right? So Egypt, when I was younger, Egypt was pretty liberal. And then they got a lot more conservative. And exactly. I don't know that much about it. Someone had explained it to me, basically saying that it had to do with their contact with Western versus Arabic culture, so that apparently there was a lot of, well, I was told there was a lot of interaction with American companies and like contracting with American companies, and that people that were going back and forth and working for these American companies or Western companies were getting a lot more, liberalized, and people were getting a lot more westernized. And then when that ended and they started contracting more for countries that were more, conservative Islam, it started shifting more conservative Islam. I could have it all wrong, right? Like I could be totally wrong about that. It was just something that somebody from the Middle East told me on a flight. That was their explanation for it. I don't know if that's the explanation or not, but I do know that there was a shift. There was a cultural shift. They still were an Islamic culture, a Muslim culture, but they went from being fairly more westernized to being a lot more conservative, Islam during my lifetime.
Because Muslims sometimes fail to find a common ground, unfortunately. I mean, Islamically, all women have been commanded to do is dress modestly. That's it. And at the most part, you don't have to necessarily wear a headscarf. You can cover. It's basically just, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, that women don't really necessarily have to cover their head at all times. Just modesty is a requirement, and so obviously and I personally don't think that's wrong. Would you want your mother and your sister?
Oh, I mean, I personally, while I personally don't really see the point to modesty rules, what I will say is that it would be hypocritical to live in a society where people can't run around naked and call some others. You can certainly say that there are more and less rigid enforcements and structures for it. I definitely agree that that's true. And you're even describing some, right? You're saying, well, there are some people who want to cover this woman entirely, and you think she doesn't even need to wear something on her head, just dress modestly. And I'm saying that I personally don't care if anybody's wearing any clothes.
And I would say with modesty, it's none of my damn business.
But
women can wear whatever they want.
Yeah, people can, but the fact is, I can't even here in the U.S.
From my perspective.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is there's this range of what is allowed. And so I think that's kind of what you've been saying, Sad, is that there's a range, right? That there is all this ground that goes from super, super liberal where you don't have to wear anything to cover everything. And then there's all this stuff in between. And that somewhere in between there, maybe people can meet and have kind of like a dialogue that isn't screaming. Is that right? Yeah.
That's true. I hope. I mean, I really don't like that either because I know I in the past show when Matt insulted a prophet and abused him. I know if I would have shared this recording with anyone else, they'd be like, "Oh my God, you didn't react." It's like, why would I react to it?
Yes, different people will react to the concept of blasphemy in different ways. Correct.
Exactly, because the thing is, like in his own lifetime, he was insulted and thrown stones and all sorts of stuff and he didn't react with much better. Okay. Well, at least I should be trying to follow his example.
Okay.
As the Muslim.
I think that we could probably talk for hours on this, but I'm going to say that we do have other callers, and I do think that you have made your point. Do you think that we are on the same page with this so far?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of common in Islam and atheism, but unfortunately, there's the one thing that we can't really reach common ground on. And I'm going to say that
there's a lot we can't reach common ground on. But your call is about the common ground, so that's what we're talking. So, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. If that's okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to some other callers. But I want to thank you for your call.
Thank you. Just one last thing. I wish there was a way to honestly there was a way to prove God scientifically or in some way. Unfortunately, there is.
We wish so too.
To believe in it only.
See, more common ground.
Yeah. More common ground.
So I wish there was a way to do it. I mean, there's no way to scientifically prove it, and unfortunately, that's the way it is. No matter what kind of explanations people can come up with.
Well, at least you're acknowledging that. We have some other callers coming up who don't. So
well, thank you so much for your time, and I'm glad at least I was able to move through this conversation without any problems. And thank you so much. And I also wanted to apologize to any listeners last week for any comments I made. They were all. I guess we got into a bit of a crazy argument, but I really wanted to say sorry to Matt even, and I hope he peace. Okay. And I really do come in peace, so I hope we're cool with everything. And thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you. Have a good one.
Muhammad.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, people.
Hello. What do you want to talk about today?
I want to speak. I just want to take off because there was a great misunderstanding in my last call when I spoke to Matt. I just want to make sure my points are clearly understood. I'll try my best to clarify what I meant.
Okay. Well, let's start from the beginning.
That was on the Atheist Experience show, I believe. I said that I believe that God is an eternal, self-sufficient being above his creation, and that.
Did you say why you believe that?
I want to explain why I believe he is eternal and why I believe. Why I believe he is eternal and why is he self-sufficient and why he has to be one.
I'm just curious if this is like you defining God or if it's you concluding that a God with these particular characteristics is real. It's like saying, like if I asked you, if you called in to say, I'm calling in to explain to you all about Yeti. And you were to start by saying Yeti are large, mammalian, furry, ape-like, human-like, bear-like creatures that live in the snow. That's kind of a definition of what a Yeti is. It doesn't really tell me how you concluded that that is in fact what a Yeti is. So are we starting with that as a definition and then seeking to confirm it?
No, I'm speaking about the definition. We don't need definitions actually, but the problem is that I see that many people, they don't know who God is in the first place. Like I speak to
I'm not convinced anybody knows.
They think,
you have to show us that. You have to show us that God is in the first place.
And you say many people don't know what God is. I'm not convinced anybody knows. It's like saying, I mean, you could say people know what unicorns are, even though unicorns aren't real. And that's because we have this consensus. Is that kind of what you're doing? Is that we have a consensus definition of God and so on?
God, what I'm trying to say is that God, I'm trying to explain to you why I believe God, the God of Abraham exists.
Okay.
Who is a perfect being, a being above the heavens, who created us in his image. That is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So what's your proof? What's your evidence?
What is my proof? Okay, I want to speak about this. I want to explain why there must be an eternal being who is self-sufficient, above the world, and that...
Like physically above the world?
Yes, I want to explain many things about these topics.
Okay, because to the best of my ability, ISS hasn't hit heaven. So, the International Space Station, right? We don't have airplanes running into angels.
I don't think he means like floating above the earth. I think he means above in a metaphoric sense.
Well, then we're going to have to explain that too.
No.
Go on.
I believe in the God of Abraham, who is a being above the world.
Okay, then we're going to have Eric Nate's going to answer to his question, which is, what does above the world mean?
Above, like something ascends, and an angel ascends to the heavens.
Okay, is the moon above the world?
The moon is above the earth. The sun is above the earth.
Sure.
Okay.
But please, I will go into all of these, but just one by one, please.
Sure. So let's start there.
Just pick one thing and start there. And
eternal. Why God must be eternal?
No.
Why there is an eternal being who brought to the.
Okay. What's the argument for why there must be an eternal being who brought forth the universe?
Yes.
Go.
The argument is. The evidence is what we see around us. Those are trees, animals, human beings, plants.
Does this look at the trees?
And we look at these things and we realize that there is someone who is bringing them into existence.
Okay, I'm gonna interrupt you. I'm gonna interrupt you, Muhammad. And this is despite maintaining a really good Zen heartbeat. This is absolute garbage, because if you want to make an argument that there must be an eternal being outside of this, you don't start by saying we look around at the trees in the world and we reach the conclusion that this being must exist, because I look around the world and I don't reach that conclusion. As a matter of fact, I think anybody who looks around the world and reaches that conclusion for that reason is a seriously flawed thinker who doesn't understand how we reach a conclusion.
It's also a post hoc rationalization. You're looking back at something that you already beve, and you're going, this matches the worldview that I already believe. No?
So start again.
Yes, I will explain to you exactly what I mean. Creatures exist. This is...
I agree, creatures exist.
Creatures exist.
Yes.
Okay. So when I look at the tree, when I look at the human being, I accept that he began to exist, that the tree began to exist.
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. We have to take a look at what you mean by begin to exist, because the evidence points to matter changing form and changing pattern and rearranging. And what we mean by... Please stop. What we mean when we say Matt began to exist is, at some point, this particular pattern of matter got labeled and called Matt. And so that is when we identified this. And that is sort of a way for us to more easily keep track of the universe. But if you're arguing for something beginning to exist in the sense that 1 second, at 1 time 0, there isn't this thing, and at time 1, there is this thing, that's not quite what we mean.
Is that the definition you're putting on things, Muhammad?
I take the position, Matt, I take the second position you brought forth, namely that there was a time where I was non-existent, where I did not exist. I was non-existent, totally non-existent, and then I began to exist. And I take this position because the position that matter only rearranges I believe it's not a good position.
It is the only position that is supported by reason and evidence.
No, I don't believe this. Why do I not believe this?
Okay,
well, then let's see his reason and evidence.
Then we have a fundamental disagreement. And how are you going to demonstrate? How are you going to demonstrate that I should accept yours?
Yes, I understand this 100. I want to tell you why.
I really wish, Mohammed, that you would stop saying. I really fucking wish that you would stop saying, I understand and I want to tell you, and just start by telling us what you want to tell us.
I'm trying to tell you, really, Matt.
Literally, you just did the thing I cautioned against.
Okay, so we disagree with you on the beginning to exist unless you want to offer up a definition that we would agree with.
Yes, the argument that things, actually it is supposed to be an observation, but the argument that the arrangement is not the correct position is that everything around us is which is composite has fundamental components.
Okay.
It has a finite number of fundamental components.
Did those fundamental components exist prior to what you're calling the instantiation of that thing?
No.
So the fundamental components, hang on, I'm asking a question. So you are saying that the atoms that made me didn't exist before me?
You have to draw the line somewhere. It might be the atoms, it might be the molecules, it might be the fundamental components. You have
fundamental components. All right, I'm drawing a line here. I'm no longer interested.
That's fine.
So you take this.
No worries. All right, so are you talking about consciousness? Are you talking about what makes you separate from the atomic makeup of you? Like if you cut your hair or clip your fingernails, are those still you or do those stop existing? I mean, let's break away from the trees for a second and talk about you.
Yes. I believe that I got created, and personally I believe that I got created out of the fluid, out of semen.
Oh, yeah? Well, I hope so.
Is that people don't accept this because they claim that there is only the arrangement to this. They claim that chemical changes...
Everybody on the planet accepts that you were born in part because of semen. That's the point I was making when I asked if the constituent parts that made you existed before you existed, and you tried to argue that they didn't. And now you're saying that you were formed from semen, and I presume an egg, unless you've got some other non-standard excuse.
If you what I'm trying to say, Matt, I'm trying to say that things do rearrange, but they're not limited to that rearrangement. If you go to the fundamental components,
how does that matter?
Those fundamental components do not...
Why are you arguing against something that nobody has... Did I ever say that after things rearrange, they are limited by that rearrangement? Did I ever say anything remotely like that?
No.
Then why would you bring it up? Why would you bring it up as if it were some sort of rebuttal?
Because we have to observe that things begin to exist out of other things. They literally begin to exist. If we don't accept this, then we'll be looking in the wrong places.
Okay. So
it is very clear to me that things begin to exist out of other things. Rearrangement, if you take the rearrangement...
This is a semantic disagreement. I already agree with you that a sperm and an egg come together. And at that point, something changes, and we begin to label from that point forward, we label that a new entity with a name or an identity. That does not mean that the thing came into existence. That's just the point at which we said, here is a demarcation where we are going to insert a label to divide what things were before from what they are now. It is a matter of convenience. It is a matter of us labeling things so that we can more clearly understand them, describe them, and evaluate them. That is independent from the fact that everything that, when the sperm and egg got together, the sperm existed, the egg existed. They got together and they changed. There's nothing new that was created. It's just at that point there's a rearrangement and change, and we pick that point to label. You could also pick not just the moment of conception. You could pick the moment of implantation. You could pick the moment of heartbeat. You could pick the moment of brain activity. You could pick the moment of birth, and as the ancient Hebrews did, you could pick the first breath as the moment that becomes a thing. And for example, when the ancient Israelites did a census, you did not include any children that were under 1 month old because the infant mortality rate was so high that what we're going to count as people in our society are things that are likely to survive. So there's another area of demarcation, even if they had named it. All I was saying, all I was saying is that there is a difference in context when you talk about something coming into being, between something coming into being from nothing or something coming into being from constituent components in the past that changed form. That's it. That's all I was saying. And you...
okay, I understand this point. But I take neither position. I do not limit this change to rearrangement. For example, when I take...
Where do you diverge here? What's different from what Matt described? How's that different from your viewpoint?
I want to explain this. Long ago, people used to look at, for example, when you cut down a tree and you make a chair, they understood that you're not creating a chair in the sense that you're making components begin to exist.
Okay.
Yes, but they understood before that when they understood that the wood itself, the wood was created out of the earth, meaning that it began to exist out of the earth.
They're wrong.
Yeah. Do you think that Earth, Matt? Do you think Earth out of Earth comes wood, or do you think that there's a process that trees grow?
There is a process to everything.
Okay, so let's break it back away from trees and back to people.
No, stop. The thing that you're describing is the difference between an artificially manufactured object out of constituent components and a naturally occurring object that arrives through natural processes. When a tree grows, it doesn't create wood out of nothing. It starts as a seed, and the wood is part of it, and the wood expands, and there's more because it's gathering nutrients and it's gathering other things. It is turning constantly other things into more wood. This is a natural process, and you are trying to draw a line, and a good line, between, hey, when the tree keeps growing, the wood increases, but it doesn't increase in some sort of, hey, here's new wood from nothing. It's new wood from stuff. And in much the same way that when I get fatter, it's because I ate food. Okay? I'm creating, and by the way, I'm not creating new, I'm not, by the way, I'm not creating new fat cells. I'm expanding fat cells that already exist by eating. But there's a difference between me naturally growing from a fertilized egg and someone creating a robot me out of other parts. There's an undeniable difference between those two things, and neither of them demonstrate something coming into being from nothing. Neither of them demonstrate that there must be some sort of eternal creator.
So let's bring that back, Muhammad. Muhammad, with that explanation, are you still putting forward that things come from nothing? Or that anything can come from nothing?
I don't believe it was correctly. I don't claim that anything we see around us is created out of nothing, like it begins to exist out of nothing.
I agree with you. See, we're coming to agree.
However, Eric, I don't believe that things only rearrange.
Okay, then you're going to give me an example of something.
Other things.
Please, that is, okay, please give an example of something that is not the result of rearrangement.
You can see the fundamental parts where they look, any fundamental component which is not composed of anything smaller, an indivisible component.
I asked for an example. I asked for an example of something that arrived. Holy crap. Holy crap. Holy crap. I'm just going to keep saying holy crap until you stop talking. I asked for an example. You're claiming that there is something that arrives through some process other than the rearrangement of matter. And I asked for an example of that. I asked for an example of that, and what you started with, holy shit. Holy shit, can I finish my sentence? What you started with is fundamental things. That I want an example that proves your point that there are things that change that aren't as a result of a new rearrangement pattern of matter. Because your argument hinges on the demonstration that the notion of
matter changing form is insufficient to explain the bulk of what we see. So I want an example, and saying fundamental something or others is not an example.
Well, especially because at the atomic level, Muhammad, you have to realize that when you're dealing with atomic matter interacting, that those things can change, that a molecule from one
I just want an example.
thing can move to another thing, and it can become different, right? Larger atoms can break down into smaller ones.
This is really easy. We don't need a physics lesson. We need an example. Give me an example of what you're saying, or I'm done.
Yes, the subatomic particles, I think nobody disagrees about this, that they are indivisible.
Okay,
so the basic components are indivisible.
I would like an example.
Yes, you can't see annihilation and creation of...
I would like a fucking example.
Yes.
Well, I think examples of fucking might not be helpful.
In the annihilation and creation of matter, the proton and the electron and the electron.
I am beyond completely done. I want an example that demonstrates your claim that there is something that arises through some process other than the rearrangement of matter into new patterns. And now you're going off, and now you are rambling about subatomic particles. Give me an example, or I will hang up on your ass.
I told you the subatomic particles, they are created.
Bye. Oh. I keep my fucking promises. And if you ask me for an example of something that is the foundation of what my position is, I'm either going to be able to give you an example, or I'm going to acknowledge that there's a flaw in my position.
It's oftentimes somebody will ask, well, why don't you go after, Islam more often? Don't you think Islam is much more dangerous? Globally, you betcha. No doubt about it. In practice of my understanding of the average practitioner, I think Islam in its current state is definitely more dangerous. I don't spend a lot of time on Islam because I don't have to deal with them very often. There's no Islamic power base that is attempting to, by legislation, marginalize my rights or dramatically affect the way business is done in this country. The difference is that people don't see is that Christianity has within it just as much, if we're talking about the Bible as the basis, which, who knows, has within it just as much potential for evil and destruction as Islam. Christianity shouldn't get any credit for the fact that it was dragged kicking and screaming from its evil practices by changing culture in part because of secular, in part because of the merging of different religious cultures. The fact that the Christianity people practice now is safer, less harmful, is not something that Christianity should be credited with. It's something that society as a whole should
do it themselves.
Yeah. In the Bible, and I'm not going to get chapter and verse right now, it's clear. If your husband or wife or somebody should try to lead you to worship false gods, you are to put them to death, and it specifically says that your hands should be the first upon them. That's not open for interpretation. That's not a fuzzy, it's a euphemism. We didn't really mean kill them. It's the same thing as death to the infidels. It's just translated slightly differently, and nobody pays any attention to it or puts it in practice. But the potential is still there. And in the right hands, the right influential people can grab hold of a congregation, and by gradually feeding them more and more authoritative bullshit, can lead them to the point where they can commit atrocities. And I, despite the fact that I'm not accosted or pained by Christians on a regular basis, and I have plenty of them that are friends and family that I love, who would never go down that route, who could never be led that far astray. They have built their own custom Christianity that is safe and largely protected from that. The potential is still there, and that is why I'm never going to quit what I'm doing.